I'll take a stale tortilla chip and eat it!
Alright. Ah, you fucking disgust me. Hey everyone, it's me, MattCMG, and welcome to another installment of Matt Slowly Becomes a Complete Fucking Weeaboo, the unofficial name of the official series where I chronicle my escapades in trying out different anime. Every few series I watch, I make a video with my brief thoughts on the shows after a first viewing, I do some haha funnies, and I take suggestions from you all on what shows I should watch next. You guys know how this works at this point, so let's get weird, let's get wild, let's get right into 4 more anime that I watch unironically.
What's this? A mecha anime with an insecure protagonist, a redhead tsundere, the extinction of all life on Earth, all animated by Gainax? If you thought Evangelion, then you thought wrong, because we're talking Tengen, Toppa, Gurren, Lagann. Did not mean to rhyme that.
I'm not a rapper.
This was a show that I originally got into simply because of the name itself. Gurren Lagann or Gurren Lagann just sounds phonetically pleasing, but the full title, Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, just sounds cool. Like, I can imagine an anime character screaming this, and I guess my imagination became reality. Other than knowing the title, the fact that it's a mecha anime, and that Yoko is top tier waifu material, I knew absolutely nothing going into the show, and upon finishing it, I felt that it was definitely more than worth my time. Gurren Lagann takes us to a world where humanity is subjugated by the beastmen and their giant mechas called gunmen, forcing humanity to live underground in numerous villages around the world. In one of these villages, we find our protagonist, Simon, or Shimon if you watched it subbed, a shy, timid young boy, and his surrogate older brother and mentor, Kamina, who is literally just bravado in human form. Kamina wants to see the surface that many believe doesn't even exist, and Simon basically tags along for the ride. One day when drilling, Simon comes across a small mecha that they call Lagann, who he, Kamina, and our scantily clad sniper Yoko use to defeat a gunman who has infiltrated their village. From then on, Simon, Kamina, and Yoko become Team Gurren, who set out to retake the surface from the beastmen. Eventually, the team commandeers another robot who they call Gurren, which then combines with Lagann to form the titular Gurren Lagann. This is a very general description of the first half of the series, as the second half is completely different in scale, but I won't spoil any of that for you. Like I mentioned earlier, Gurren Lagann is animated by Studio Gainax, which were once known as juggernauts in the anime industry, but it's specifically the team behind Gurren Lagann that went on to form Studio Trigger, known for one of my favorite anime, Kill la Kill, among a few other shows and movies. Needless to say, this is some fine sakuga right here, and it's evident in almost every single episode of Gurren Lagann. It's genuinely some of the best and most fluid animation I've ever seen, some insane fight scenes and jaw-dropping visuals all throughout. They do this in such a way where every movement is exaggerated so they can make the characters move however they want. Like, the proportions and the physics and logic of these characters, especially the mechas themselves, make absolutely no sense at all, but the show embraces that for the sake of fluid animation. You can have all the pretty art you want, but if it doesn't look good in motion, then why bother? Studio Trigger could honestly animate a hyper-realistic scene of them cutting my parents' heads off, and I'd still say that's some fine sakuga. Getting back to the show itself though, Gurren Lagann has a pretty large cast of characters. You've got the main trio of Simon, Kamina, and Yoko, but there are a ton of other characters like the androgynous scientist Liran, the stoic Rasiu, the naive Nia, and the only man who could possibly rival Kamina in bravado, Kitan, and his black sisters. They're not actually black, by the way, they just call themselves that. While some of these characters are just supporting characters and nothing more, there are others who end up playing major roles later in the story, some of which I legitimately didn't expect. Like, this show will take characters who you would never have thought were even remotely important, and then make them main characters, and if not main characters, then definitely important side characters. All of these characters are distinct and have layers to them. For example, Kamina comes across as the most confident man on the planet. He's rebellious, he's cocky, and he unashamedly does whatever he wants. However, later in the series, we see that this bravado is really just a facade. He pretends to be confident in order to inspire the people around him, but also because deep down he's extremely insecure about living up to his own expectations. Yoko is another example, where she comes across as this brave fighter for what is right, when she really only fights because she has to, when all she really wants to do is live a peaceful life and pave the way for a new generation. When it comes to the characters though, Simon is the emotional core of the show. He's very introverted and plagued by self-doubt at first, but it's his relationship with Kamina that helps him slowly gain more confidence and to believe in himself. And as cheesy as that is, believing in oneself is actually a major theme of the show. In fact, it's the major theme of the show. Simon is constantly unsure about himself. He doesn't want anything to do with mechas at first, but he does it anyways because he believes in Kamina, since Kamina was the only one who was ever nice to him. However, it's Kamina that tells Simon not to believe in him, and not even to believe in himself, but to believe in the me that believes in you. This quote is then amended later in the series to instead be believe in the Simone that believes in you, which I think is quite profound. Even when you don't believe in yourself, believe in the self that believes in you. The power of believing is used all throughout the show and is the source of Simone's power, his fighting spirit, and in typical stereotypical anime fashion is the thing that gets the characters out of almost every bind. If this section seems extremely shallow, that's because it is, since I honestly can't really talk about all the deeper themes and do them justice without getting into spoilers, which I highly recommend you go into the series without. If you go into it knowing what happens and knowing all the cool and important scenes, then you kind of lose a lot of emotional weight when you do eventually watch it. Much like I do with every anime I talk about in this series, go into it blind, you'll thank me later. At the end of the day, Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann is a series that hits all the stereotypical anime bullet points. It's got giant robots, scantily clad women, over-the-top characters, and even more over-the-top fights. But beneath all of that flashy exterior is a show with a lot of heart that is able to inspire you at your lowest moments. If you're ever feeling down, give Gurren Lagann a shot. But more importantly, believe in the me that believes in you.
Row, fight the power! Row, fight the power!
The other major takeaway is to never kiss Yoko. Bad things happen when you kiss Yoko. That's all I'm saying. Moving on to the most recent show that I watched, let's talk Tokyo Ghoul. I started this one around Halloween since I thought it'd be kind of spooky, but it's more edgy than anything else from what I've found. Much like a lot of you, this anime first came onto my radar after I heard the opening theme, Unravel. It is such a fucking banger, and it really just made me want to try out the show, but I had just put it off for years, until now, of course. Unfortunately for me, however, the show isn't as rad as its opening, and I'll explain why.
Sees Tokyo Ghoul, sucking on my titty. That's the fucking title of the entire show. It's called Tokyo Ghoul. The T stands for sucking on my titty. Tokyo Ghoul follows the story of Ken Kaneki, or is it Kaneki Ken? Still kind of fuzzy in that Japanese surname thing. Kaneki is a regular college kid, but he's also kind of a fucking Melvin. Like, this dude has one friend and he sits around and reads all fucking day. Fuck reading. All my homies are illiterate. But anyways, Kaneki is just a regular guy, and one night he goes on a date with a girl named Rize. The date goes well, the two have a lot in common, it's kinda wholesome, until she attempts to, consume his fucking flesh. To be honest, that could probably happen to me, and it still would be the worst date I've been on. Kaneki, of course, struggles, but a series of events causes a steel beam to fall on both of them, allowing Kaneki to live. However, once he gets out of the hospital, Kaneki starts to notice some strange things happening to him. He can't hold down food, he can't be hurt with regular shit like knives, and he has an unyielding desire to eat human flesh. It turns out that the doctors transplanted Rize's body parts into Kaneki to save his life on the spot, and Kaneki is now half ghoul. In this world, ghouls are creatures that look and act exactly like humans, but are actually these bloodthirsty, cannibalistic monsters who can only survive off of human flesh and coffee for some reason. Being a half ghoul, Kaneki now has to balance his old life as a human with his new life as a ghoul, which is a lot easier said than done. You see, due to their violent nature, ghouls aren't exactly accepted by society, and there are entire police task forces called Doves from the CCG that exist purely to hunt down and kill ghouls. As you can tell, the premise is actually pretty promising and offers a lot to be explored, and for the first season, I think it was all explored pretty well. The first season of Tokyo Ghoul is actually pretty fucking kino. It's only 12 episodes, but they do a lot with it. Granted, they try to cram a lot of manga chapters into these 12 episodes. We get some really great insight into how Kaneki deals with his aforementioned conundrum, but this season also has some really interesting concepts that are pretty relevant to the real world. For instance, the season does a great job at humanizing both sides of the conflict. There are a lot of ghouls who enjoy killing and eating people, but not all ghouls are like that. Some just want to live peacefully without killing anyone. However, even the ghouls that have done nothing wrong are still persecuted simply for being ghouls. This is further perpetuated by the CCG, who refuse to see this more peaceful side of ghouls. The character Mato is an example of one of these characters. He's a dove who despises ghouls because of what they did to his family, but takes that out on ghouls who have done nothing wrong. This whole dynamic between ghouls and doves is a vicious cycle, where the doves kill ghouls for killing people, which then forces the ghouls to kill them back in self-defense. Another interesting theme of the first season is in regards to addiction. Ghouls can only eat human flesh. They can't eat anything else, and judging by some of the behavior exhibited by Kaneki and the other ghouls, the urge can be hard to control. Much like a real-life addiction, they can't control their urge to eat human flesh, however they can try to keep it at bay by other methods. This can apply to almost any addiction, whether it's drugs, porn, going on a YouTube binge of shitty 2010s pop music. It's not my fault, I have a problem! There are even points in this season where I thought they were making obvious references to eating disorders, where when ghouls eat human food, they have to puke it up or else it might kill them. Alongside those themes, we also get really deep into Kaneki's psyche, especially near the end of the season. He tries so hard throughout the season to be this wishy-washy, represent both sides kind of guy, but throughout the season realizes that that's not an option and he has to pick a side. I won't spoil anything for you since I think you should watch at least the first season for yourself. However, then we get into the other 3 seasons. Let's start with season 2, Tokyo Ghoul Route A. While the first season was a very condensed and censored version of the original manga, it was still mostly pretty faithful with minimal changes. The second season goes in a completely different direction story-wise, while still trying to give Kaneki the same arc. The reason this season is called Route A is because it's a separate route from the manga. In the anime, Kaneki joins the organization Aogiri Tree, hence the A, while in the manga he forms his own group. These two things ultimately serve a similar purpose, but the execution was different, which is why it likely didn't sit right with many fans. The author of the original manga, Sui Ishida, actually consulted with Studio Pierrot to develop the story for this season. He came up with the idea to split from the manga and create this alternate version of the story. The goal of Route A was to have the actual events of the story be different while still leaving Kaneki in the same place mentally. Honestly, as long as the purpose of the story was the same, I don't mind that they deviated from the source material at all. To me, it doesn't matter how you change the source material when adapting something, as long as the changes are just as good or better than the original. The problem with Route A is that the changes aren't really for the better, but even worse is that they try to cram so many manga chapters into 12 episodes that not only does everything feel extremely rushed, but they also skip over a ton of incredibly important details. For instance, this may be a slight spoiler, but I don't really fucking care. The final scene of Route A with Kaneki walking through the aftermath of the raid with the acoustic version of Unravel playing in the background is actually a really great scene, and it all builds up to Kaneki's fight with Arima. However, due to the rush nature of the anime, we don't know who this guy is or why he's important, but even worse is that they skip the fight completely and the season just ends. This fight is extremely important for setting up the next season, but they just skip it entirely. Another issue is that despite Kaneki being our main protagonist and the emotional core of the story, it felt like he was barely in this season. The season focused more on side characters, some of which I actually really like, such as Toka, Yoshimura, Hinami, but they spent so much time focusing their limited runtime on these characters that our main character is barely in it. And speaking of characters, Route A in the next 2 seasons do this thing where they just straight up forget to introduce characters to you. There will be characters that show up in this show, and they just kind of expect the audience to know who they are, and there will be other times where they'll introduce a character early on in the story, forget about them for a little while, and then expect you to remember who they are when they show up completely changed, both mentally and in terms of design, since we last saw them. But now let's get into the last 2 seasons, Tokyo Ghoul Re. Re takes place 2 years after the events of the first half, where they introduce a new cast of characters. While the first 2 seasons were more from the Ghoul's perspective, Re focuses more on the CCG. These seasons are a bit better than Route A, but are just as rushed. I won't spoil anything here, but I liked how they concluded Kaneki's arc. It calls back to the first season really well.
Overall, Tokyo Ghoul was kinda meh. The first season is great, while the other 3 seasons are not as good, and are even worse once you know what happens in the manga. I haven't read the manga myself, but if I ever do decide to come back to Tokyo Ghoul, I think I'm probably gonna read it instead of rewatching it, and honestly, y'all are probably better off doing that as well. Unless you're lazy and you don't like reading, unlike this fucking Melvin. I think the pattern with this video is that I've been trying to avoid your typical shonen anime, you know, your typical punch things with the power of friendship to win type shit, if you completely disregard the fact that I just talked about Gurren Lagann 2 animes ago. And to avoid that, I decided to watch Death Note, a show known for being more like psychological, more cerebral. Oh, apparently my anime list considers Death Note the #1 shonen anime. Huh. What the fuck? Alright, jokes aside, despite being considered a shonen anime and the manga being one of the poster boys of Weekly Shonen Jump, Death Note has none of the tropes, so I'm not counting it as a shonen anime. Fuck you.
In case you aren't familiar with the show, or you only know of it through those edgy kids at your high school who growled at people and wrote your name in their replica notebooks, Death Note follows the story of Light Yagami, a high school student who, by complete chance, comes into possession of the titular Death Note. This ain't no regular notebook, however, as this is a magical notebook. That is to say, if you write a person's name in it while thinking of their face, that person will die. There are a lot of other rules and stipulations that one must follow to use the book, and almost all of them come into play at some point or another. But anyways, Light uses the notebook to kill criminals with the goal of using it to better the world and become the new god, which is totally not insane. Eventually, the police catch on to what's happening and try to catch the person responsible, who they give the moniker of Kida, which is the Japanese pronunciation of killer. To take on the Kida investigation, the international police call in L, the world's greatest detective. Eat your heart out, Batman. And he is the only person who can even remotely rival Light in intelligence. Oh, did I mention that Light is insanely smart? Like top of his class and puts trained professionals to shame type smart. Through a series of events that I won't spoil for you, Light and L end up becoming rivals in a way, constantly outsmarting each other at every turn, like some 4D chess type shit. Which brings me to one of my favorite aspects of the show, the mind games. I mentioned earlier that this show was psychological, but I don't think even that does it justice. Almost every episode there's a new plot twist that changes the entire game, and there are moments where the characters make some incredibly big brain moves that even if you're following along super closely and paying close attention to every tiny detail, you still won't be able to figure it out until they reveal it to you. This makes for some extremely cathartic moments at the end of certain arcs that make you, or at least they made me, yell out in absolute awe of the fucking power moves. This show is the master of build-up and payoff, where there are entire arcs that are almost entirely build-up just for one big moment at the end of the arc. The problem with that though comes in that some of the episodes that are entirely dedicated to build-up can sometimes be a little bit boring. For instance, I thought the Yatsuba arc was kind of boring at times, but it all paid off in the end. This show also deals heavily with dramatic irony, where we the audience know everything while the characters are still figuring it out, and it can get a bit frustrating at times if you're impatient. The way the show stays consistent with the rules of the Death Note and the way the characters play around those rules are what makes it interesting, because what we know isn't always what the characters know. Another place this show shines is with its characters. I briefly mentioned Light earlier, but alongside being extremely intelligent, we see him slowly descend into madness. Of course, I won't spoil anything, but I will say that Light starts off pretty boring, but once he sets his goal of becoming God after like the first episode, you slowly see him become more and more narcissistic. It's actually probably a problem that I related to Light in certain scenes. Plus, this dude is an absolute fucking Chad. He be pulling bitches left and right, but at the same time, he cares about none of them. So he's probably a diagnosable psychopath. In fact, he definitely is, I would think. In contrast to Light, L is kind of a lovable dick. Like, he will tell you how it is. He'll tell you that you're wrong and you're stupid, but he does it so nonchalantly and with such confidence that you kinda like him for it. In hindsight, L became one of my favorite characters. Light and L are meant to be two sides of the same coin, and it shows. Light is more or less the bad guy, and the only reason we root for him and not the lawful L is because Light was the character we met first. I don't know what the consensus is on Misa, but I liked her near her introduction, but as she got less and less relevant, I liked her less and less. She definitely do be waifu material though. I'd smash. She got that perfect mix of edgy and ditzy. I kinda like it. I think my favorite character though has gotta be Ryuk. He contributes absolutely nothing to the story and is true neutral incarnate. I fucking love it. The other Shinigami go around and actually do shit that affects the story. Ryuk just kind of sits around and judges everybody. It's fucking great. Some truly powerful energy emanating from this spooky motherfucker. One of the most interesting things about Death Note are the philosophical implications that the show teases, but never really goes too in depth with. I think one of the best things you can do with a show is have a reason for people to be talking about it even a decade after it's ended, and Death Note does this, but in a way that's kind of a detriment to it. It only teases these ideas, but never really makes them a major theme, but it's interesting either way. I think the best of these concepts is the idea of morality. What Light does with the Death Note is unequivocally murder. He's directly and knowingly causing these people to die, an undisputedly evil act. But at what point does murder become justified? He's only killing criminals, not innocent people. So is this good murder? And by the cops coming after Kita, are they protecting the same criminals that they put behind bars? And even if Kita was in the right, what reason should there be for one person alone to be judge, jury, and executioner? A lot of interesting stuff is played around with in this show, and I think it's the different ways you can explore the ideas presented that keeps the show relevant and the fan base alive, even all these years later. Overall, Death Note was a show that I'm glad I watched, as not only is it one of the most iconic and recognizable anime of all time, but I found myself interested in the concepts the show presents and was genuinely invested in how each character would make their dream a reality, even if I don't agree with their actions. I didn't want to get too spoiler heavy in this video, which is why I didn't mention a lot of the stuff that happens in the second half, and I highly recommend that you watch the show for yourself, completely blind, as it makes for a great experience. It's only 37 episodes, and it's on Netflix, so go give it a shot.
Low-key, this show got me a little bit hungry for more, hungry for a little bit more Death Note. If only there were more Death Note out there, perhaps a live-action film of sorts. Oh well, I guess I'll just have to deal with YouTube video essays and oh fuck shit! So far in this little watching anime series, I've only talked about anime series, but never really any anime movies. I'd seen some anime films before, but only really like the franchise ones, like some of the Dragon Ball films or the My Hero Academia movies, but I had never seen a completely original anime movie. Until now. I decided that a good starting point would be the highly praised Kimi no Na wa, aka Your Name, which I had only heard about through social media, and I am so glad that I gave it a shot. This movie is fucking beautiful in every aspect, and I'll tell y'all why I like it.
Your Name follows the story of two protagonists. Mitsuha, a small-town girl who dreams of escaping her life in rural Japan for the big city, and Taki, a city boy who can't shake the feeling that something is missing in his life. Wait a second. Small-town girl? City boy? Is that Journey?
Hey, that's Journey! Kick ass!
Howard!
That is Journey.
By that synopsis, you could probably figure out that this is a romance anime, and initially that put me off because I've never been into that kind of thing. But the way it's handled in this movie is unlike anything I've seen before. You see, this isn't your typical love story, because instead of your typical boy meets girl, they fall in love type stuff, the two first meet each other by what seems like a complete accident. This movie pulls a Freaky Friday and has Taki and Mitsuha switch bodies at random points throughout the week. You'd think that that'd be the entire movie, since the body swap trope has been done before, but they actually catch on to what's happening pretty quickly, and they use the body swap to bond as friends pretty early on in the movie. And the rest of the movie plays around with the concept in a really interesting way that I won't spoil for you, that results in a lot of really great plot twists that I also won't spoil for you. Speaking of plot twists in this movie, they result in some truly great emotional moments, and I think that's where this film shines the best. There were pivotal scenes that literally made my jaw drop, and those scenes work because of how the film gets you invested with the characters. I'm not typically the kind of guy who really feels things when I watch a movie or TV show. Typically, I see something happen and I've either already predicted it beforehand or the initial shock of the scene wears off pretty quickly. But this is the first movie in a long time that got me to actually feel real emotions long after the credits rolled. There were scenes that made my jaw drop from the sheer awe of what was revealed. I felt real sadness when the characters did. The Katsewada Doki scene made me scream when I first saw it. The climax was so tense I had my ass cheeks clenched tight enough to turn my shit into diamonds. And the ending made me genuinely happy. If you're an emotional person, then this movie will fuck you up, but in a good way, because if it could fuck up an emotionless robot like me, then y'all are in for a goddamn treat. Moving on, this movie is fucking beautiful. The animation is stunning. There are some insane animation techniques in here, and there are some absolutely gorgeous shots that will likely become iconic among anime fans in the coming years, if they aren't already. If you don't believe me, just watch the OP. It's crazy good. To complement the superb animation, the music of this film is next fucking level. The insert songs by the band Radwimps are used to really capture the vibe they were going for, and the montage that happens through the beginning is a great example of that. The score itself is also great, with tons of leitmotifs and tracks that really enhance the scenes that they're in. Again, the Katsewada Doki scene comes to mind, not just for the music itself, but in how the editing of the music deepens the emotional impact. Much like with Death Note earlier in the video, my favorite thing about Your Name are the themes, and I think the major theme of Your Name is that we are all connected to each other. Your Name is a movie about connections, about the ties that bind us together through space and time, and this is represented by the ribbon that Mitsuha gives to Taki, which symbolizes the red string of fate. And this imagery of a red thread connecting Mitsuha and Taki is used all throughout the film. There's also a scene in the middle of the movie where Mitsuha's grandmother explains this very concept, and it comes into play later in the movie. While the movie is mainly about the fate between two people's intertwined lives, the movie also plays around with the idea of fate in general, or rather the idea of changing fate, and it does so in a way that I can't spoil for you, but is very interesting. All in all, Kimi no Na wa is a fantastic anime film, and just a fantastic film in general. I've only seen it once as of the making of this video, but I can tell you right now, without a doubt, this has become one of my favorite movies of all time. Granted, I don't watch a whole lot of movies, but I think it's telling that an anime film that I've seen only once can have such a profound impact on me. I would recommend this movie to literally anybody, even people who have never seen an anime or who know nothing about Japanese culture. It is a fucking wild ride, no matter who you are. So that has been 4 more anime that I've watched unironically, bringing me to a total of 11 anime that I've seen so far. I have some plans on what I want to watch next, like Cowboy Bebop and Fully Cooley, but if you have any suggestions for what I should watch, leave a comment down below with your recommendations, and while I get down there, leave a like on this video and subscribe to see what I'll watch next. I've been MattCMG. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.
Good luck, fellas. Do the impossible, see invisible.